Let's crack on with tonight's first debate. Which reprobate is going first?
That would be me, Dan Grimes. Although I'm not a reprobate. I think I'm right on this one, actually. And as was the Business and Trade Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, earlier on this week, who got on the wrong side of the woke brigade when she said that Britain's wealth and success didn't only come from colonialism and exploitation, but also came from the post-glorious revolution, reforms to the rule of law, property rights and the relative economic and political stability that came afterwards. The truth is, Britain's success and wealth didn't only come from colonialism. Now, that might not be a very fashionable thing to say at North London dinner parties, but actually the truth to Britain's success is a lot more boring than going and conquering the world. It's about things like the climate. It's about things like the abundance of sheep, the relative age, health and education of the population during the time of the Industrial Revolution, and, of course, the post-glorious revolution reforms that Kemi Badenoch, the Business Secretary, mentioned in her speech in the City of London earlier on this week. So I've just got one question for Kemi Badenoch's detractors. What is it about the truth that you don't like? Benjamin, you're a detractor of Kemi Badenoch. What is it about the truth that you don't like?
I thought you were about to say, Benjamin, you're a liar. What do you want to say about this?
Did you just say that part of our economic success is how many sheep we have?
Yes.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, one of the reasons why the Industrial Revolution happened in Britain and not in other parts of northwest Europe is because of the abundance of sheep that we had in this country, which meant people had a lot of wool to spin. And one of the inventions that kicked off the Industrial Revolution was something called the spinning jenny, which was something which allowed people to basically spin wool in a much quicker amount of time. Anyway, this is quite boring.
No.
But the point is...
Well, you said it.
The amount of sheep in Britain was one of the reasons why the Industrial Revolution happened here and not in other places.
Well, I think by that logic, Wales should be much richer than London if sheep is the secret to success. Look, the word only I would take an issue with, because the idea that we only have wealth because of colonialism is clearly inaccurate, because there are other things. But I think the suggestion that it wasn't a fundamental part of the way Britain developed would be ridiculous. You know, the kind of countries we were colonising, the amount of resource we were taking back to our own country, which obviously included, slavery, a huge beneficiary to Britain for a long time. Clearly that was happening because of the huge economic benefits that gave us an unfair advantage. And so I do think that you take some Commonwealth countries that were pillaged of resource and have struggled to this day because of that, while Britain benefited massively from countries like India.
Let's just get some tweets up. The Guardian wrote an article about Kemi Badenoch's speech earlier on this week, which is really over the top. And Kemi actually responded to it, saying the hysterical reaction by The Guardian reading left to my speech on how smart regulation creates growth is fascinating. I quote one of my favourite books, Why Nations Fail. It explains how property rights and the rule of law created certainty for the Industrial Revolution. Is there any part of that you disagree with, Benjamin?
Well, the rule of law, we are 1,000 years of democracy and relatively stable monarchy. And I don't dispute that has had a huge effect on us, the fact that we're a resilient democracy. But we were also taking huge amounts of resource, which was making life a lot easier for us.
Yep.
And I would just say one other thing. We have fundamental economic problems in this country at the moment. The idea that the Business Secretary is using a speech to talk about whether we got profit from colonialism or not, she really should be talking about the actual things that affect people today.
Conor, you're quite big on history. What did you make of the Business Secretary's speech?
Well, I'm wondering how Ben can make the claim that we pillaged... make the claim that we pillaged all of these resources. Why were they not being used in the countries that they existed in? Why were they just sort of sitting in the ground, not being put to use like they were in England in the Industrial Revolution? Was there something about the culture of those places that made them economically inferior and less entrepreneurial than the British Empire, for example?
And that's verging on racist.
How is that verging on racist?
Because you're talking about lots of countries, where non-white countries, and seeming to say
you
that they weren't capable.
I said culture. Don't accuse me of racism on live television. Well, you don't want to do that, mate.
All the countries that we were colonising, they weren't white countries, were they? Besides Australia, where we dumped some of our
besides Australia, besides America having lots of...
What did you mean by culture and economically inferior?
Well, they didn't have a philosophy of property rights. They didn't have one of entrepreneurialism. They didn't have one of the inalienable dignity of the individual. This is why we had to stop things like bride burnings, for example, over in India. So they didn't have the superior Christian enterprising culture that we
There
have.
we go. We got there in the end.
Hang on,
didn't we?
since when? Hang on. The
I
majority
think
of
that
Christians are
comes
not
down
white.
to the idea that you think we have some kind of racial superiority. I think that's what's at the
Ben,
heart
you
of
keep
what you've
saying
just
that.
said.
I will sue you.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah, I will.
Do you know,
You won't be back on the show.
I would argue, actually, coal was a much bigger part
Yes.
of our economic output, right? And sugar, which was involved in the trades you mentioned, was it wasn't tiny, but it was a much smaller part of the economic makeup. It was white men, like my grandfather, who were sent down to mine coal when they were about, children. So I don't buy this idea that Britain is a country built on slavery. That's the reason the Business Secretary has to waste her time speaking about this crap, and I would call it that, is because people like you propagate this lie about our country. So it is entirely your fault.
But it is right to talk about all the different factors that led to British success and wealth in the world. That does include colonialism and imperialism. It also includes coal. It also includes war. It also includes climate. So why isn't it we can't just have a reasonable discussion about it, Diane?
Oh, well, everybody loves to take sides and throw pies. But
A few were thrown earlier on, I think.
But the thing is that there is a lot of management that has happened. Like, I'm listening to this fabulous podcast about dictators, and I've had Colonel Gaddafi in the car. And the point is that when he came into power, he had a lot of wealth in Libya, and due to his mismanagement, that country absolutely plummeted, and the rights of the citizens were completely stripped away. So there has been good management since that era, and good decisions have been made. Good people have been sent to work down coal mines. And you can't just say it's... I agree, you can't just say it's down to these things that happened 200 years ago, when I have heard about Colonel Gaddafi absolutely ruining his country.
OK, but can I just ask a question then? If you're saying that we didn't massively benefit from these countries, from the empire, why do you think we were doing it?
Of course we massively benefited from it. I don't know if anyone is disputing that. Colin,
Well, that's very much the nature of what you're saying.
No, I didn't. No. I say we imparted lots of cultural benefits onto those countries. Of course we benefited.
That's a different question.
Hang on. We benefited by the use of the resources that were sitting in the ground not being used, but we also spent in the most expensive moral crusade in history between 1607 and 1867 to abolish the slave trade. So we did it at great cost.
Indeed. OK,